Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about the hidden costs of living in different states and whether or not you should move to any given of these states, and maybe recommending against some of them. This is a story that I wanted to do for a while, but there wasn't enough data out there, at least in a simple one-page article, essentially, that I could put out there for you. The link will be in the description below the like and subscribe button. So with that said, let's actually jump into the article that comes from the Business Insider, but we're going to start with a daily debate. If you could choose any state that you want to live in, what would it be? If it's your current state, tell us why you decide to stay there and live there. If it's family reasons, tax reasons, whatever it may be. So, the headline from the article that comes from Business Insider, quote, "The 5 states with the highest hidden costs of home ownership and the 5 with the lowest." Now, a lot of people know what states are already the most expensive. We're talking nowadays, especially about our Floridas. Our Tennessees in certain places are getting more expensive. California always has been at the top of the list. Washington, Oregon, a little bit, New York State, all these different places, we know that they are expensive. But these hidden costs, these are the costs of insurance, maintenance, all these extra things, property tax, that you don't necessarily think about when buying a home. Now, that's not to say that people don't, but in this next generation of upcoming homeowners haven't actually bought a house before. If you're a little bit older, maybe you have, maybe you know about these extra costs that are baked into home ownership, and therefore, though it is still appealing to build your equity, they are things that you have to consider. In a younger generation, millennials who possibly haven't bought a house yet, or especially Gen Z, don't necessarily know about all of these. So I'm going to run down the list of the top 5. I'm going to actually tell you which one I thought was the most shocking, and then we'll extract quotes from each one describing why they are the way they are. So coming in at number 1 is Hawaii, which wasn't the most surprising in the world, considering it is one of the most expensive places to live. Then we have California. Nobody was really surprised by that one. New Jersey. That one actually took me by surprise. And one of their main costs here is the property taxes, as well as their energy and utility costs. So on tax side of things, it's about $10,485,000. So that $10,485, that's not the cheapest thing in the world. Then again, that is on average. Obviously, it depends on the size of your house. And then energy and utility bills, somewhere around $6,000 annually. That's a lot of money. Then number 4 is Massachusetts, and number 5 is Washington. And they list specifically the Seattle area, where they're talking about a maintenance cost, an upkeep cost of your house of roughly $14,000 a year. Now, is that to say that everything is that way? No. You could have a solid year where you're not paying anything, but maybe 2 years, you're looking at, over a 2-year course, you're looking at $28,000, and that's averaged out between them. Also, internet and cable costs are extremely high, which is something that I found a little bit surprising. I don't know about you. Mainly because they are an internet hub, and this is because on the West Coast, there's infrastructure up north there. They also have lots of rivers, which allow for these companies to build out massive data centers. I know one of the largest data centers that Google has ever built is actually in Oregon. So I figured with proximity to these things, they might actually have been cheaper. But it also could be the network effect in working in the inverse, which is all these different companies are clogging up the network, and therefore to pay for good internet, you actually have to pay a little bit more. So with those, if any of them surprised you, tell me. I want to know, because I think that list makes sense. Massachusetts was a little bit of an oddball, but given the old school nature, how small it is, and therefore the urban sprawl that is slowly expanding, and the historical nature of a lot of these places that you can live within Massachusetts, it started to make sense. And the property taxes in a more liberal-ish area tend to be, $8,000 per year is not the worst in the world out of this list, but it is not necessarily the best, especially when you line it up against number 46 in Arkansas, where the property taxes are roughly $1,445. I mean, if you're talking about a policy that actively encourages people to come to your state to buy property, therefore probably stay around for a long period of time, or at least invest in the state, you're going to want policies like this that have a low cost for the people who are participating in your society, in your network. They also have very low maintenance costs, which is somewhere around like $5,000. And also, the internet and cable bills are, for an annual basis, are $1,378. So, all around pretty good. But then we have Missouri, also a contender, and I'm not surprised by this one at all. In the Middle America region, this is where you're going to see a lot of your low-cost ones because, great example, the next one is Indiana, another state that isn't necessarily flyover country, but they have some good infrastructure. But it feels, for a lot of people, when you think about Indiana, it's fields. It's beginning the Midwest before getting into the Illinois region. Then Mississippi, which I did not see as contentious. I thought it was honestly going to be at number one, but number one makes sense when you think about it, which is West Virginia. Ironically, those two states, the bottom two, are also some of the poorest in the entire nation. But on an annual basis, you're talking about maybe $3,300 in utility bills from Mississippi, property taxes of roughly $1,500. In West Virginia, you're talking about property taxes roughly $1,000 per year. I mean, that's absolutely nothing. And when it comes to insurance for the house in West Virginia, you're talking another $1,000. So cumulatively, the annual hidden cost budget for West Virginia is roughly $13,000. And to remind you, at the absolute top of the list, we have Hawaii, and their overall hidden cost number is somewhere around $34,000. Now, in these markets that are more mature, that have a lot more money flowing around in them, it makes sense. Also in Hawaii, which is a location that is extremely limited and where you can build, it does make sense that these sort of costs are as high as they are. But that doesn't mean you can always justify increasing these property taxes and trying to sap as much money out of the people who are just buying vacation houses there, because you might actually end up hurting the local population, which is a thing that West Virginia probably is thinking about in their mind as the number one example of low cost. How many people actually want to move to West Virginia? I've recommended to friends and to people who are looking to move to West Virginia. I've always thought West Virginia is a very beautiful place. There are some easily accessible areas in the most eastern part of the state, close to Northern Virginia and DC, if you have a job in that area. Of course, it's still a little bit further out, and the prices are increasing in those areas compared to the rest of West Virginia. But you really break it down, and West Virginia being one of the poorest states in the nation, how many people are moving into West Virginia buying multi-million-dollar mansions and therefore jacking up the cost of all these other things, maintenance in areas, insurance in areas, and then also at what point do you actually have a dissuasion technique from people moving in? This is like in Hawaii, if the personal property tax is so high, you're actively dissuading people from moving in there and just buying giant mansions unless they are absolutely able to afford paying those high property taxes. Where in West Virginia, how many people are actively thinking about moving to West Virginia unless you already are in hard economic times, or you have a really good gig where you say, hey, I want to pay as low taxes as possible. I want to live in a rural area and I still want to possibly have internet connection. Some parts of West Virginia offer that to you and you can do things remotely. But these different disparities between the nations and the states, and I've obviously highlighted the worst case and best case. They really demonstrate the society with so much variation within it that we have in the United States that allows for our federalist system to actually work. Because Hawaii can have its own system. They can charge whatever they want in order to keep people, or even try to force people, do not join and enter their system. In West Virginia can keep the barriers as low as possible in order to encourage more people to come into the state and bring in more money. And if you're thinking about moving, I would honestly look at this article and go through the list. They have a comprehensive list that they actually attach at the very beginning of it, of the ranking from 1 all the way to 50. This is something that people don't consider, as I mentioned earlier, or at least people who don't know what's going on. They don't calculate this into their average cost. And considering you're going to probably have it for 30 years if you're putting down a mortgage for it, if it's not a starter home, this is something that you have to factor in. And if you're buying in a different location than you already are living in. Therefore, it has different costs. You don't have a good rough estimate because if you've lived in Virginia your entire life, you know more or less what these costs are when renting or when your parents had to pay for them. And now, when you're buying in that area, you have a rough idea of what it will cost and what's added on top. But if you're moving to a different state, these are costs that are not easily, and I say easily, understandable because you can get a theory for it, but on average, you do not have the breakdown. So I would go read this article. It is a fascinating one. And also, I think it shows overall the 1 to 50 shows the change in demographics as well. The highlighted ones are at the very top of the list are ones that most people are moving out of. And it doesn't necessarily mean at the bottom of the list, the 50 plus, where they have the lowest hidden cost. That doesn't necessarily mean that more people are moving there, but there have been discussions and active attempts in order to lower these barriers in order to encourage people. And whether or not they're working is another conversation. So, but with all that said, that is all I got for you today. If you want to read the article, like I said, the link is in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at your Daily Flip, where I post the links to these episodes that come out on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as well as 6 and 6, which is 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. It's international news. I also post the link there on that Twitter handle on Tuesday and Thursday. So if you want to stay up to date, you want to get direct links rather than having to subscribe on YouTube, though it's always greatly appreciated, or you just don't want to have to turn on the notification bell, follow the Twitter and you can get the links there. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.